this is the last area in the populations space, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders. I really should acknowledge that it's inappropriate for us to get into this without acknowledging that ordinarily we should actually have someone from an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander background actually talking to this. And for whatever reason, we weren't necessarily able to find that voice for this particular webinar. We will address that. And I think in part, the strategy does attempt or signals some approaches to try and bring in Aboriginal partnerships into the conversation around water safety. We know there's lots going on out there, but at a national level, we've got to think through how we actually formalise this in an architectural sense. So one of the recommendations, I think, was creating a steering committee, and there's someone on the chat earlier that was talking about the importance of steering committees. What else, Stacey, are we prioritising in this area?
I think it's prioritising, obviously children's a big one, but again, looking at the wider health and outcomes. So water safety and drowning prevention, again, great outcomes, longer term outcomes, but really looking at other outcomes, whether that be for around youth, employment, those types of things, giving people skills and knowledge. But as you said, Justin, the most important thing is having those Aboriginal voices in this conversation and going forward, and having people on board, much like what I talked about with multicultural communities. We can't do this without the communities that we're trying to reduce drowning with, and how we do that might be different with every community.
Yeah, I think we've got a real challenge here in transitioning from programs to partnerships. Like I do think that that's one of the challenges, is there's a number of initiatives, whether it's swim schools reaching out to a community, whether it's an organisation going out and providing a range of services into communities. I think that's a transition that we need to learn to try and escalate the priority and sort of reverse it in a sense. So it's not a two-way sort of relationship, actually. It's sort of fundamental adoption of water safety in a way that has meaning to communities. Rich, have you done any thinking in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your comments originally, Justin, that we really do need to be working with the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples as part of this. And I'm speaking from obviously outside of that. And one of my big challenges that I see with this is about sustainability programs, where we've seen people do work in this space where they partner with the local community and get things up and running. They're really great programs and they seem to get really good traction, but then the money disappears and everything kind of falls in a heap. And from my perspective, one of the real challenges is that these communities just see people coming in and out, and they've got a couple of years of funding, and they see them for a moment and then they disappear, and they sit back and say, well, do we really engage with them? What's their commitment to this kind of long-term opportunities around? And I think that for me is one of the fundamental challenges. Like, they're often happy to work with us and come along, and that's what we want to see, is these great partnerships. But I think we've also got to be committing to a long haul. This is not a 1, 2 or 3 year kind of little funded project. And I think that for us is the big challenge. But it can bring great opportunities, both for us from a water safety perspective, but also for the people in the communities. Having great swimming pools or swimming areas, learning skills around first aid, learning water safety and rescue skills, transitioning that into actual employment opportunities, I think are really exciting. But we've got to do that with the communities. We've got to have them as part of the voice, and we've got to make sure we're committing to it over sort of a really long period. This is not a sort of a short-term funding opportunity. And I think that's a real challenge. And it's a challenge because governments don't like to fund things for a long period of time. It makes them nervous. And I think that we've got to make sure that they feel comfortable with that and with working through those sorts of issues.
Stacey, you released some research last year on this area. So there is good news, like there is progress being made here.
There is progress being made, and that was a great thing to read, that drowning statistics have actually decreased among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people over the last 10 years. And that's, I think, due to a number of different factors. As you both mentioned, there are some great programs going on across the country, but obviously funding is an issue in terms of sustainability. But I also think it's about building capacity as well. So building capacity, which helps with sustainability, but it also means that it lessens the likelihood of, I guess, the reliance of people coming in and out of those communities, and the community actually is empowered to run their own programs, or they have the skills that can help with that sustainability as well. So great news is the statistics have gone down, but again, one is one too many. And there was obviously that 0 to 4 age group is still a high risk community with that, or high risk population. So that's really important that we get those messages out and really push the water safety messages within that age group, as well as across the lifespan.
Great. Okay. Now, so there's some work going on at organisational level in this area. We talk about partnership and commitment and change and reconciliation. I just want to grab someone from the crowd and drag them into this panel. Lauren Nimmo is the General Manager, Health Promotion and Research in Western Australia. I'm sure I got that wrong, but Lauren's going to join us very, very quickly. Royal Lifesaving Western Australia, Lauren, has just in the last 12 months announced that it's got a reconciliation action plan. So firstly, welcome.
Thank you.
And then secondly, can you tell us a little bit about this agenda?
Yeah, I guess it, as you mentioned, started around 12 months ago. And I guess we looked at ourselves as an organisation and realised that a significant portion of the work that we were doing was really geared towards and focused on engaging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in water safety. But we recognised that there was a bit of a gap in the way that we were doing that, and it forced us to have a little bit of a look at ourselves as an organisation and individual staff members about how we were engaging and working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. So we formed an Aboriginal steering committee, which has representatives from a number of different Aboriginal communities throughout WA, with the main purpose, I guess, to establish a reconciliation action plan. Which has been a really interesting process for us as an organisation. It's really forced us to reflect, I guess, as an organisation and individual staff around what our current understanding and awareness is of Aboriginal culture and how we live and work with them, but also, I guess, has really challenged us in what we're currently doing, and I guess provides us the motivation to really look at how we're operating as an organisation and reflect about how we can actually seek greater opportunities to create more meaningful relationships and meaningful partnerships and collaborations with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And for us, it's a little bit more than just increasing participation in our programs. It's about improving the way that we do things and really shifting the way that we work as an organisation to accept and engage with Aboriginal people. So it's been a very interesting process, and over the last 12 months, we've actually started to see some really positive changes and shifts in the way that we're doing business.
And so talent pool, is talent pool an example of a positive shift in the way you're doing business?
Yeah, I think we've seen a couple of things. Talent pool certainly has been a really successful program for those that aren't aware. It's really focused on engaging particularly young Aboriginal people in regional and remote areas of WA to engage them in skill development, so taking them through the journey of water safety and skill development through first aid, bronze medallion, and really creating those employment pathways to not only provide them with more employability and skills that they can then use to create more meaningful lives for themselves, but also to work towards increasing the diversity within the aquatics industry. And we've seen some fabulous outcomes with the number of Aboriginal people now employed as lifeguards and pool operators throughout public swimming pool facilities, but also going on to engage in further study and work in other sort of health sector areas as well, which I think is a really positive outcome, not only for drowning prevention in the aquatics industry, but for broader health and social benefits that has for people. But we've also seen greater diversity here within Royal Lifesaving officers as well, with that real commitment and formal commitment, I guess, to how we recruit and engage staff members, but how we also work with our key stakeholders.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We've just embarked on that journey, and certainly Sabra in our office has a phrase which is a humble posture of learning. So we're all being humble and we're all learning, and it's a really fabulous thing to do. Actually, I think we don't recognise our bias and also some of the significant gaps in our own understanding and knowledge as a consequence of not engaging in a conversation and reconciliation. So I'd encourage, there's a few people in the chat asking about it. I think you can access that information just by the link in terms of the Royal Lifesaving WA RAP, but also if you just look in reconciliation action plans generally, you'll find there's lots of organisations that have embarked on that journey. Thanks very much, Lauren. While I've got you, is there anything else you want to share with us, water safety strategy wise?
Well, look, I just think it's a really fabulous document that's been pulled together that provides some really clear directions for not only us as a sector, but really encourages those outside of the sector. There's been a lot of discussion today around collaboration and partnerships and making them meaningful and of benefit to both organisations. And I think that this provides a really good platform for us to not only engage better as a sector, but to engage more broadly with academia in terms of knowledge translation and how do we get all this focus on research, which I think is really fabulous to see in the strategy, into those formats that can really be easily adapted into programming policy and sort of development in that space. So really excited to see what we can achieve over the next however many years.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Lauren. We'll say goodbye to you. I'll click my fingers and you'll disappear. All right. Any final words as we wrap up? From a couple of short words from you, Rich, in summary?
I think, look, this plan is an excellent step forward, and it's been really great to see the evolution of the plans. And I encourage people to go back and look at that first one that we did in, what was it, 98, that it came through, and just see how we've grown as a community. And I think the complexity in the way that we're looking at the issues is really great. Just a big encouragement to try and bring in diversity into all of our work that we're doing and recognise that, you know, the way that we see things is just one part of the world in which we live. So thanks for putting this on, Justin, and thanks for having me as a panel member.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for your expertise and time and long-term commitment to the issue, Richard. Any final words from you, Stace?
Just thank you for having me. I think everyone sort of already talked about how the water safety strategy does provide a blueprint and a really good framework going forward for the next 10 years. And I think the important part is the fact this is a long-term strategy. Previous strategies have been 4 or 5 years, but this is actually about making that long-term change and working together collaboratively, both within the water safety sector and also thinking about those wider partnerships as well, and also thinking beyond our drowning prevention and water safety outcomes. So we've talked about employment, we've talked about skills, we've talked about sustainability, and partnering maybe with people or organisations that we traditionally wouldn't have. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that it is a long game, and people are, or as you know, and there have been lots of strategies leading up to this point, but we also need to bring lots of people along on the journey as well.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. Well said. So thank you both to you and to Richard.